This week's episode is brought to you by Goodman B, Julius, Nick Barner, and Steve. Thank you, Goodman B, Julius, Nick Barner, and Steve. It's with the charitable support of listeners like you that helps keep our top secret Black Book project staffed with psychic interrogators that intimidate reanimated alien corpses from Zeta Reticuli to write the content for our episodes under duress from the threat of continued spankings by our chief of security named Dale. If you'd like to help Dale keep spanking aliens or just hear the second half of this episode, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you immediate access to our entire library of extended shows, now easily accessible right inside Spotify, but I'll send you a 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our Bunny Baphomet cover art and the digital keys to our Discord server, where you can help us figure out if the Nazca mummies are real or not. Special thanks to those who continue to donate to Hecka Astra's GoFundMe. As you may already know, Hecka and her pets were served a dubious, heartless, short-notice eviction from her long-term residence, just in time for the harsh Canadian winter. With the help of your donations thus far, combined with selling, well, pretty much all her worldly possessions, we're on the cusp of seeing her secure in an RV and a rental space for it so she can get back to work supporting herself. If you'd like to help her push through this harrowing ordeal, please check out the link to our GoFundMe in the description section of this episode. More than anything, sharing this page on your social media platform of choice has been immensely helpful. Thank you so much for all the support so far. On this week's episode, we plunge back into the mysterious case of the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, but this time with the guidance of the illustrious citizen journalist who goes by the name of Ashton, as we interview him about his incredible findings, the facts he's uncovered, and the community growing around him that aids in the investigation. If you still need to see the mind-blowing footage we're discussing, make sure to check out the link in the description. It is important. During the course of our interview, Ashton lays out the facts and gives us a detailed timeline of the events leading up to the disappearance of the aircraft, what we know about the 3 otherworldly orbs which can be seen zapping the plane, the chilling human motivations for doing so, the conspiracy to hide the truth, and why the footage of this event is absolutely and totally legit. In the extended version of the show, available for free on our Patreon, we talk about the bigger picture and what the use of this technology means for the future of humanity. We also touch on the idea of sophisticated government psyops, super advanced AI, alien motivations, and even how NASA is next on Ashton's list of things to expose and why. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Quick question, what do you want me to refer to you as? Luke, Hack Rabbit, or what?
Oh, you can refer to me as Luke. How about you? Do I refer to you as Ashton?
Yep. At some point this weekend, I'm going to reveal my full name and what have you, but we don't need it. I don't want to necessarily go into that right now.
Okay, here's one for you. Will invisible airplanes ever be a thing? I just can't see them take off.
Some Laffy Taffy jokes.
Hello everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just speculate about the scarcely acknowledged overlap between modern UFO phenomena and various different cultural mythologies from around the globe. Nay, we risk our precious scruff scouting deep behind enemy lines upon the warpath of UFO disclosure by investigating the carefully sifted facts and the latest intelligence gathered by the man leading the charge, the illustrious Ashton, the Anon, as he discovers the truth behind the mysteriously vanished Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, and the utterly compelling footage which captured the strange circumstances of its disappearance. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by, well, at this point, just a happily hidden heroine, Hecka Astra.
Hello. I am in the crunch time part of my getting stuff done for moving and transitioning to a new place, so I apologize if I don't say much of anything or if I don't say anything at all. all. I'm juggling a lot. Also want to say thank you for your patience and for anyone who contributed. Thank you.
Oh, also, there she is, the vociferous Voyager, Mari-sama.
Yo.
On this week's very special episode, we're interviewing the superpowered Anon citizen journalist who is actively cracking the case of the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, who goes by the screen name Ashton. Welcome to the show, Ashton.
Hey, thanks, Luke. Happy to be here.
Now, I've been following your progress as you've continued to investigate, connect dots, and rally a team of independent researchers that, I believe, are truly beginning to solve the mysterious case of the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, and I'm so excited to have you here to tell the whole story. Now, from what I can tell, it seems like you've spent a considerable amount of time, focus, and energy on this investigation, and you've done so despite some desperate attempts to debunk and memory hold the entire topic from the internet. Are you happy with the progress you've made, and how are you holding up?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that I'm extremely happy with the progress we've made. I've never been happier in probably my whole life with the outcome of any investigation. And with respect to holding up, again, I think that this investigation has reached a point where we have so much evidence that we could pretty much convict anyone of murder at this point. Really, the thing that we're looking for now is just exposure.
That's incredible. It sucks that the powers that be worked so hard to try and bury this story. You don't even see it anymore. It's like when those debunks came out, people were like, okay, let's pack it up and go home. Like, that's it? That's all? Like, that's definitely
people
not
were
all.
pretty quick to just go ahead and brush this one under the rug and claim victory and think that it was fake. And I think that if you look through the evidence, and as we'll talk about today, it's pretty obvious that these videos are not fake and potentially not fake in any way whatsoever. And that's what we want to go ahead and prove to the world. We don't want to have anyone necessarily have to believe us. We want to prove it with the facts and the evidence.
Which is incredible, and why I've become a fan of yours and intend to see this through all the way until the end. And I think others should care too, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, having listened to some of the Twitter spaces you've spoken in, it seems like prior to beginning your investigation, you were really not the type of guy who others would describe as obsessed with UFOs or aliens. What got your goat about this whole scenario, and why did you get so interested in it in the first place?
Yeah, it's another good question. You're right. I was never actually part of the UFO community or conspiracy community or, alien community. My own personal beliefs before this were that, I thought that the UFOs, UAPs were potentially real from what we've seen in the congressional hearings and from the Navy released videos in 2017. With respect to aliens, I didn't really think or don't really still think that they're necessarily on our Earth or haven't seen evidence of them, but there has to be aliens somewhere out there. What got me interested in the MH370 incident is just the mystery involved in it. So I've always been interested in mysterious events, especially when it comes to plane crashes and trying to understand why they happened. I looked into it quite a bit in 2014 just on my own personal time and followed the investigation as it went on. I was never very satisfied with the results. So when I saw the videos that were posted on the UFOs subreddit on August 8th and realized that there's two of them that are in perfect synchronization with one another, that's what really got me interested in looking into it. And as the investigation carried on in the first week or two, as the entire communities were pouring through every single frame and proving their authenticity, that's when I took the mantle upon myself to begin to write about it and tell the story and make sure that this isn't something that could be left behind, brushed under the rug, or ignored by the media.
The footage is pretty spectacular, and from what I understand, the original posts by Regicide Anon came fairly shortly after the actual incident. It's just they were kind of overlooked, and let's say they are spoofed, they would have had to do it awfully quickly.
Yeah, very, very true. So I actually remember seeing the thermal footage back in 2014, and at that time, it was before the Navy videos had been released. I just thought for sure it had to be fake, and I had never seen the second video either, which gives it a lot more corroboration. So, seeing both videos 9 years later and having the basis to understand how they could be real, both from the 2017 videos, from the 2019 Trump satellite leak, which gave us perspective of what advanced spy satellite footage might look like, and then all the way coming up to 2023 and the 2020s, where we've seen scientific papers that show that wormholes could be possible. We've seen AI in action. People are using it on a daily basis now, and we are potentially on the verge of superconductivity as a discovery for humanity in LK99. So with all of these things as a basis, we can now begin to understand understand these videos to be authentic.
That's just incredible. Now, before we get really into it, why should other people be interested? The temptation to just ignore it and have the whole thing just be put to sleep is always there. What's so important about finding the truth behind Malaysian Airlines MH370?
Well, of course, just getting the truth for the victims of the family, the witness who saw it, and everybody who's been lied to is probably the most important aspect of it. But the beauty of these videos is that there's something for everybody depending on what you believe in. They show us orbs that are in a triangle formation. So if you are into UFOlogy, there are explanations for you. If you're the type of person who's into conspiracies, then what we're talking about here is the largest verifiable conspiracy of all time. And if you are into more esoteric aspects, then these videos can be interested in you as well. But ultimately, the most important part is the truth. What we needed to get from the US government is answers as to why they were watching MH370 and what we're seeing in these videos.
I'm a bit of a space nerd myself, so the prospect of something moving like that, coming out of nowhere, and then being able to perfectly synchronize with two other aircraft, it almost looks like you're watching something paranormal happen. And of course, the audience of the show loves that kind of stuff, and I never thought I would see anything outside of a mushroom trip that could look like that. Like, what kind of technology is this? You know, that's what I'm interested in personally.
It literally looked like a sci-fi game, like triangulating and locking on kind of graphics.
Yeah, and the thing that I think from my perspective when I watch these, I've kind of gone through a whole evolution of what I think we're looking at here. Initially, when I saw it, it looked too abnormal to be real, and I thought that the videos themselves have to be real, but there had to be something added in over the top of them. Now, as the investigation carried on, and we started to realize that the flash of the zap that we see accurately illuminates the clouds, as I've talked to VFX experts that say that the hardest part about faking a video like this is the part where the orbs are spinning around the plane and they accurately blend into the trails of the plane. Then I moved on to believing that what we're seeing here is some non-human intelligence of hyper-advanced technology that's beyond our understanding. But then as I dug into the science of it, I realized that it's not actually beyond our understanding. It's just simply more advanced than what we were comfortable with and what we knew about. And so now I'm actually of the opinion that what we're seeing in these videos is potentially our own reverse engineered technology that we have control of that might be incorporating all those aspects I mentioned: AI, superconductivity, gravity manipulation through electromagnetic forces, and the ultimate piece, which is black hole or a wormhole.
Woo! That's somewhere between being extremely cool and being extremely scary. It's a bit frightening to know that humans may be in possession of technology that can warp space and time in that way on demand.
Yeah, you know what the funny part was that I made the joke that I'm actually less afraid of non-human intelligence orbiting my plane than I am of governments orbiting my plane. At least with the non-human intelligence, I can avoid the jungle and avoid the tigers. I can't really avoid my own government if they want to come after me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was that, I don't know what you call it, like a press release by, what was it, Aero? And they showed all these like funny craft and stuff in their visualizations. And some people pointed out that at the corner, you could see like 1/4 of what looked like an orb. And then if you put all the corners together, it makes like this weird machine orb. And some people thought that that was like a wink and a nod or a bit of a confession. Like, are we producing these things?
Yeah, and I think that if you compare to UFOlogy, and I'm somewhat versed in the history of UFOlogy, even though I wasn't necessarily part of the communities, you know, you can see that there are similarities to that, but it seems a little bit different. The orbs that we see are perfectly spherical. They might actually just be energy and not even necessarily have a ton of mass to them. And they don't necessarily adhere to a lot of stuff that like whistleblowers like Bob Lazar talked about, where, you know, we would see these crafts kind of turn and then kind of move forward. So I think that that gives credit to the idea that this actually really is our technology, potentially reverse engineered from those types of technology that we might have recovered.
It reminds me a little bit of the Foo Fighters in World War II. They were usually described as balls of flame, and it's hard to see from the satellite footage exactly, and we see from the thermal footage they might be balls of flame, you know?
Yeah, the key is what we're seeing in these videos, both videos are actually shooting in infrared, IR. So what we see as a thermal, actually we believe is an overlay that the person that leaked the video put over the top of the original, and they did that with specific intent. The original camera is an electro IR camera on the MQ-1C Predator, Gray Eagle. And on the satellite video, we're also looking at what we believe to be a false color IR, meaning that the video we're seeing there is actually at nighttime, even though it looks, you know, very clear and the plane even looks illuminated. It's just that the relative background light is so low that it appears that it's almost daytime. So what that means is that these might not actually even be visible to the naked eye, what we're seeing there in terms of these orbs. So that's very interesting.
And something that struck me too is in the fully infrared video, that one, the orbs are polarized. Like they orbit in such a way where I believe it's the hot side faces the plane. Mm-hmm. It's really strange. Like, because if you're talking, even in UFOlogy, they'll talk about orb craft. There's like these red orb crafts, but they always show up as just like emanating light from all sides and heat. There's not one side that's cooler than the other, which is, I mean, that's kind of what sold me on it.
That's a very astute observation. I think you're the first person on any of my podcasts that I've talked to that has actually brought that up, which is that you can actually see that heat signature spinning on the axis of the orbs. So these orbs lock in after all three show up, and they begin to start a pattern after that. And while they're doing this pattern in the triangle formation, they're not just spinning around in one axis. They're actually spinning around on their axis, but the angle of the triangle is essentially shifting around the plane. And what's happening has been modeled is that it's actually encircling the plane over time. So if you were to take time and crunch it down to a single point, then what these orbs are doing is making a full sphere around the plane. It's very bizarre.
Whoa.
Yeah. And the pattern that they're making, we've mapped the pattern too. It's too precise to have like human or even non-human intelligence like piloting those, in my opinion. It looks more like something that's been programmed, and it creates either like a sine or cosine, one of those wavelength patterns. So it looks like it's whatever is happening there, there's specific purpose to it.
Now, for the skeptics out there who are still hanging on and want to know, how do you feel about the attempts to debunk the drone and satellite footage so far? Is the footage able to stand up to scrutiny? And if so, why?
Yeah, the footage definitely stands up to scrutiny. I think that we have debunked every single debunk that's out there several times over, to be honest with you. The most popular one seems to be a VFX debunk that claims that the zap effect is a graphic from a video game from the 90s. This is absurd on several levels. The first level, that the video game is a low resolution 2D graphic. And in order to produce both of these videos, you would have to create a fully 3D rendered environment to be able to have two different perspectives showing the exact same thing. Not just that, but all explosions as we know them are exothermic, meaning they're hot and they're white. The graphic on the VFX, for example, is an explosion, so it's white. So the very first thing that the people that tried to use that as a comparison did is they had to falsify the image. They had to change the color of it and try to modify it. Even after they did this, it still doesn't match our effect. And people will claim that it does, and it kind of gets to the point where it's like, is the dress blue or black, or is it gold and white? And everybody sees their own thing. But the facts of the reality are that the number of pixels are not a match. So if you were to ask someone how many pixels match, it would probably be less than 50% of them. And the counter argument that people would make and have made is, well, they would just modify it to be perfectly the same. And that's not how VFX and using assets work. It's extremely difficult to change every single pixel, and you wouldn't do that. You would simply find an exact match and use it. So in order to debunk something at a prosaic level like that, the comparison needs to be a perfect match, and not just on a single frame. It needs to be a perfect match to the video itself. So all of the debunks to date have fallen extremely short, and most of the debunkers have quit trying to debunk the videos because every time they've tried, all they've done is prove the authenticity further. For example, the person that actually proved that the zap is real by proving that the clouds are accurately illuminated in the foreground and background when the flash happens, they themselves don't believe that the videos are real. So even the people that don't necessarily think the videos are real have gone out of their way to prove that they are for us, and we're very grateful.
That's pretty great. And I remember when that whole thing broke, we went down that rabbit hole briefly and discovered that it seemed like the files didn't match the descriptions in the PDFs, which were supposed to catalog them. It seemed that they may have been messed with by Mick West or somebody who put them out there to be, quote, discovered. And there's just a whole lot of tomfoolery going on with those. Like, you have to really line it up on the edge of the one thing to, like, sort of make it match. And then everyone just, like, closed shop and is like, good enough.
It was extremely suspicious. And the way that people were quick to throw it away, very odd. What I've said from a prosaic perspective is that just because two dispersal patterns are similar doesn't mean they come from the same thing. That's like saying my butthole is your butthole because both of our buttholes are similar.
You see my downstairs mix-up?
Right? That's not exactly how it works. And just to further the point, we've made a couple comparisons where we were able to turn a donut into our effect, and another joke where we superimposed the VFX over the Nazca mummy's head to show that it could match the Nazca mummy's head as well. So So long story short, we've put so much evidence together that prosaic debunks can no longer explain the situation. The people that want to debunk these videos are going to have to start by explaining why Regicide Anon was the person that created them. Because in Regicide Anon's description of the satellite video, they say that they received it March 12th, 2014, which is 4 days after the event.
Whoa.
Not enough time to even come close to creating these. So the first, for any debunk to begin, you have to say that Regicide Anon was lying in the description, which would implicate him as being part of the hoax or whatever is going on. And if you look into Regicide Anon's account, these aren't the only videos they posted. They appear to just be a random UFO person. And we have evidence that they're not even the source. We have higher quality videos that were posted by other people. And that indicates that none of those people are the source, that they were all getting it from a third party. So there's a huge amount of circumstantial evidence that shows that these videos are authentic. They don't come from Regicide Anon, and basically makes any debunk story almost nonsensical and impossible to create.
It's kind of interesting to consider that while people are standing around saying like, oh, it's fake, it's made up, there might be somebody actually rotting in a military prison over this. We'll never know who they were.
100%. I hope to meet who I've called Agent 370 one day because they're a personal hero of mine. I went ahead and looked into what the consequences are for leaking spy satellite footage. And actually, just on the 23rd, the New York Times released an article saying that someone who had stolen secret spy satellite footage of Africa was facing life in prison and the death penalty for doing so. So it's extremely likely that at best, the person that leaked these is in prison, potentially for the rest of their life.
Yeah, that's incredible to consider.
It would be considered treason, right?
The specific charges may depend. So it could be espionage that they could have gotten them with, and they could get them for retention of, I believe it's government defense documents or even classified documents. So it really depends on the exact charges. We've looked into trying to Freedom of Information Act request it, but we're fairly certain that it'll be protected due to the classified nature.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be incredible if you did get it, though.
Yeah, it would. That would be a huge break. If we're able to prove that they locked somebody up for this, then of course that would basically prove the authenticity of the videos.
I think something else worth considering is that if you take the UFOs out of this whole situation, it certainly seems to me that there was something awfully strange happening in regards to Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. There seems to be some sort of a plot or conspiracy unfolding anyway. What do we think happened there? Like, there is something strange about that flight, even without the UFOs.
Yeah, and I think the first thing I want to touch on is if there were no UFOs or the black hole, intermediate black hole that we see in this video, I think that nobody would have any difficulty believing that these videos are 100% authentic. And I think they would have already been proven and be all over TV. I think that's what's holding everybody back, in addition to the baggage that comes along with it, which is that if these videos are real, that means that world governments have been lying to everybody, and that's something that I think a lot of people can't accept. So with respect to the conspiracy and the oddness that is going on with Malaysian Airlines, including the when the plane went dark and flew back around, there are several explanations and narratives. And I'm always very careful to state that I don't care what people want to believe with respect to the narratives around this. I really just want to prove that the videos are real and get explanation from the U.S. government as to why they were filming MH370 and what they believe is happening in these videos.
That's where speculation can come in, because it seems like they were ready to get the cameras on that situation. They had the satellites in place. They had the drone, which from following your work seems like that particular drone, was it the Predator?
Yeah, so that's the MQ-1C. I think the first question a lot of people ask is, why were they filming? And that's what you're getting at here. And the MQ-1C Gray Eagle's max speed is only about 175 miles an hour, whereas the 777 is about 600. So there's no chance that that drone could ever catch up to the plane or follow along with it. The satellite, these low Earth orbit satellites go very fast. So they're only in position to take footage like this for several minutes if they are in the right location. So what this all lines up as is that either the government got extremely lucky with filming this, or were reacting to some type of emergency event, or it was all planned from the beginning.
Let's kind of go down that conspiracy rabbit hole just for 1 minute. Maury had an interesting question about this.
Yeah, other than the orbs that we talked about earlier, kind of selling me on this being a real event, was once we started to dig into the background of the disappeared flight on our podcast after the new footage came out recently, recently, I was noticing that there were reports that the pilot's residence was raided by Malaysian officials and the FBI. And after analyzing his computer, they had pieced together some flight path data from his flight simulator program, showing a very similar flight path of a zigzag pattern all the way down into the Indian Ocean, like pretty much in the area where it was last seen. Apparently, the file had been deleted, which is why they had to piecemeal it together. And once the file was restored, it was given back to the Malaysian authorities to release to the public. But one note that really stuck out, identified by date on the file, was supposedly inscribed as a date that was the actual occurrence. And the original flight path data that he had run on his computer was a month before the incident, as if he was training up to do that. Obviously, everybody knows that. The papers will publish that part. But the fact that the data was released to the public, the modified by date was after the crash had occurred. Is that detail true? Can it be confirmed? And is it also possible that the data was tampered with by the FBI before it was passed back into the public eye?
Yeah, and of course it's always possible it could be tampered with, but as part of this investigation, we have never assumed wrongdoing. We've only ruled evidence out when we have conclusively found that there is no corroboration or that it's not based on the facts. So with respect to the data that you're talking about, it actually has a simpler explanation, which is that the flight path actually closely matches MH370 to Jeddah, which the pilot was scheduled to fly on February 4th, 2014, 1 month before MH370. So more likely he was simply practicing that route to the northwest from Kuala Lumpur. And he's a big flight nerd. This guy had a huge custom simulator in his house that he was working on and trying to make it be as realistic as possible. So it's much more likely that he was not practicing a suicide route, but simply decided that he wanted to go fly to either the South Indian Ocean or the South Pole while he was in the middle of his flight. He had over 18,000 flight hours, so he was extremely experienced. And he just enjoyed flying a lot. So generally, the simpler explanations are the best.
Well, then why would the flight path be jagged? Is it because it's only picking up, 1 point at a time, or they couldn't recover the whole flight path? And for that matter, why would he delete it off of his computer?
And from my understanding is that they essentially tried to take these points and recreate a flight path. But from looking at Victor of the Independent Group's blog specifically about this, he presents a really strong evidence that it's actually just the flight path of MH370 to Jeddah. And I would urge anyone to go take a look at his blog post about it, because I'm not necessarily super expert on when it comes to these data points. But my understanding would be that it's not that they are falsifying the data points, but potentially putting the data together in a way that really adheres to a narrative that they want to sell.
Oh, yeah, because I was under the impression that if it was tampered with, or even the fact that they're together to begin with to serve the public, it gives me cover-up vibes, especially with the FBI involved. And for me, that just rings alarm bells that the FBI or other government entities could be responsible for the event and are trying to cover their path. And I don't even necessarily think that the pilot, I don't even know if he was working alone. I might even think that he was influenced to drive this plane into the ocean, but it's all up in the air.
Yeah, and it's clear that assuming these videos are real, there's a huge cover-up involved in them. And part of that cover-up is blaming the pilot for the accident, because otherwise people are going to go to the next logical scenario, which is a hijacking. And this hijacking, if it is a hijacking, is simply too sophisticated to be the type of hijacking that we saw in, say, 9/11. So what people would logically assume, and did logically assume, including Marc Duguay, who is a famous French author, is that the U.S. government did this. And they're the ones who took the plane, because they're the next likely culprits. So they had to deflect blame from themselves, and they did so by creating a false pilot suicide myth. There's actually no evidence whatsoever anywhere throughout the whole situation that this had anything to do with pilot suicide. All of the officials, the family, and all the coworkers all stood up for the pilot, every single one of them. As I mentioned, he had all of that experience already. If you look at the flight path, there's no indication anyone ever tried to commit suicide. If so, you would just crash the plane, like many other people who have committed pilot suicide have done. The idea that this pilot flew this plane for like 7 hours until the gas ran out without anyone breaking down the door or interrupting him, like we saw in United Airlines 93 on 9/11 when the plane crashed and those heroes saved the plane from, going into the Pentagon or White House or wherever else it was going, that in any situation where someone's taking over the plane, you're not going to be able to control the plane for 7 hours with 200 passengers in the back of it. They also tried to present this idea that the reason why they was flying directly to Penang Langkawi Airport after the plane goes dark was to say goodbye to his hometown, which is just totally insane and silly. It was the closest airport that could accommodate a 777 in an emergency situation. So either they were going there because they were trying to land from an emergency situation, or they were using it as a waypoint. But he was definitely not flying over Penang to say goodbye to his hometown. Absolutely absurd.
And if he was such an esteemed pilot, he would have just probably taken his own aircraft up by himself to do a suicide. Makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense to take all these people out with you as well. So really, if you start to deconstruct the pilot suicide myth, you realize that there is no evidence for it at all. And what they've done instead is try to sell this idea of this simulator data, being some kind of smoking gun for it. And as you look into that, even that breaks down as well. So the type of cover-up we're dealing with here, and to some degrees you could argue is sophisticated, but in other ways it's not very sophisticated at all. It's just like throwing a little bit of dirt on a shallow grave.
It's a bunch of distractions. I mean, I didn't know it went that deep. Thanks for explaining all that.
No problem.
Well, that's what those PSYOP people are good at doing, is finding a way to just barely cover their tracks and then throw shade on anyone who asks too many questions and try and memory hole it. And that's usually just close enough for government work. One reason I like this is because looking into this whole incident, it redeems that pilot. And from what I know, he gave no indication of wanting to kill himself or hurt others, and other pilots who have commit suicide, they show clear warning signs, which this guy didn't have any. And even looking back 2020 hindsight, there were still no warning signs. And it seems like this pilot is the exact type of guy you would want to be flying the plane during a disaster, and that he would do everything he needed to do or could do to save every single life on that plane. And it seems like the strange flight path he took was probably part of that intention, was to protect the passengers, which leads us to question, like, what actually happened? So I think we should get into that now. Let's take a look at the investigation that you've done, Ashton, with the help of netizens and the community around you. And let's go from like start to finish, what the investigation thinks happened at this point.
Yeah, there's one other big piece that I want to bring up, which is the debris. Everybody says, well, they found some pieces of debris, right? So doesn't that mean that this plane crashed? The reality is only one piece of debris has been conclusively linked to MH370, and it was done so without a unique serial number. The media doesn't mention this, but the unique serial number plate on the flaperon was missing. And you can Google that and you can confirm that that's accurate. So you can see that from a narrative perspective, they're trying to sell this narrative that we found one piece of plane that we've matched, therefore we found the plane. The reality is this was the largest, most expensive search in history, and the official search didn't find one piece of the plane. Not above water, not below water, not one piece of luggage, not one body, nothing at all. That is actually just impossible if the plane crashed into the ocean. This is a 777. It's a giant plane. It would have been visible from space for days. We saw the Wagner Russian guy's plane on satellite crashed the next day. So the idea that this crashed and no one saw it, completely unbelievable. But not just that, there was at least 3 different devices that would have heard it crash if it crashed into the water. The SOSUS system that detected the Titan sub, that the Navy lied about hearing it for 5 days while we were watching oxygen counters on TV, that should have heard this. There's an equivalent system called the JORN system from Indonesia that should have heard this as well. The Diego Garcia hydrophones should have heard this. Diego Garcia's radar should have been able to track the airplane as well. In addition to all of that, the families of the victims were on Chinese TV proving that they could call the phones of the passengers, which after a lot of comments back and forth yesterday has been pretty much conclusively proven to be impossible if the plane is underwater. The moment that someone's phone is under like a foot of salt water, the phone's going to be dead and not going to be reachable. In addition to that, the cell towers don't reach out into the ocean like that. They only go out some miles outside of land. So there's no basis for that being possible. And I was able to uncover additional evidence that 19 family members filed a joint statement saying they were all able to call the victims' phones and have them ring for up to 4 days after the event. So this wasn't just an isolated incident for the one that they caught on TV. This was tons of families able to do it. So with respect to that, those pieces of evidence essentially break down the major narratives around it. And then with respect to what we're dealing with here, then I'll just go ahead and go through quickly the flight path of what we expected happened. So roughly 30 minutes before this plane takes off at around 1600 UTC, the first odd thing that happens is that the plane stops pinging one of the 2 satellites it's within range of. So this plane is within range of 2 satellites while it's on the ground in Kuala Lumpur. Satellite called IOR, which is over the Indian Ocean, and another satellite called POR, which is over Asia. Now, when you have two different pings, you can triangulate a signal. When you only have one ping, you can no longer triangulate the signal. And this is what happened where we had to determine what arc the plane was on. So the fact that this plane stops connecting to one of those 30 minutes before it takes off could be intent of someone trying to hide the plane. The plane ends up taking off at 16:30, 30 minutes after that. And it's flying east, northeast to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur. So it's actually going towards the POR satellite, but it never pings that satellite ever again throughout its whole flight. After about 50 minutes into this flight, at 17:21, the plane goes dark. And 64 seconds before that is when the pilot or co-pilot says, "Good night, MH370, and that's the last communication that we get publicly. At 17:21, when this plane goes dark, that's the first mystery that we have. What happened to make this plane go dark? There's a Wired article that says that the simplest solution is the best, which I kind of mentioned before, and they argue that it could have been a fire. The problem with the fire scenario is that a fire is not going to take out all the electronics simultaneously. It could explain why you couldn't land if a tire started on fire and had popped or something like that, and it could even explain the emergency scenario, but it can't explain why the plane went totally dark. It really requires some type of electromagnetic interference for that entire plane to go dark. I found that the media tries to sell the idea that the pilot could simply make the plane go dark from the cockpit. That is actually not true, not possible at all.
Oh,
it would
interesting.
require, so that's another myth that has been pushed out there. It would require, there are several different devices that would have to be shut down simultaneously to get this plane to go dark the way that it did. So this actually indicates that either there was some type of hijack that potentially occurred that used some type of electromagnetic jamming to make the plane go dark. It's been suspected that that could happen from a U.S. military aircraft that could jam the airplane and potentially even hack the airplane and take it over, although that's been highly disputed. And if you believe in the more UFOlogy aspects, it could be that there was a UFO encounter that created the electromagnetic interference. So there are a couple of different scenarios that what could be happening at 17:21. Regardless of what you believe, the radar signals made no sense. And we believe that that possibly was due to the electromagnetic jamming as well, because primary radar was lost. Secondary radar still had a beat on it, but it couldn't really tell what the plane was. But that's how we know pretty certainly that after this event happened, the plane turned back around, went across the peninsula of Malaysia, the landmass of Malaysia, and headed directly back towards Penang Langkawi Airport. Again, that's the closest airport that can accommodate a 777 in an emergency scenario. So not only have we broken down the pilot suicide myth, but now we're looking at a scenario where this is either a controlled hijacking or this is an emergency event where the pilot is trying to get help. Now, it takes about 30 to 40 minutes for this plane to get over to Langkawi Airport. I believe it's roughly 1752 where the pilot is over Penang Airport and they don't land. So that's another mystery is that why didn't they land there? Were they not able to land or was it not safe? Keep in mind that it is probably 2 a.m. at this point. The airport is closed at this point, but it would still technically be open in an emergency situation. But if you couldn't communicate, it might not be safe to land there. If the landing gear or there's some type of electromagnetic event that's preventing the landing gear from coming down, that could also make it so they couldn't land there. Now, if there was any type of fire or anything else that happened to this plane is not going to last for 7 hours into the South Indian Ocean. It's on a clock at that point. So this plane just goes right over Langkawi Penang Airport. And then it begins to fly into the Straits of Malacca and the Andaman Sea. At 1822 is the last Malaysian radar contact. So this is the point where we start to not know what actually happened to the plane. So the plane at this point is about 200 to 230 miles into the water, west by northwest of Malaysia. And then from here, the plane goes towards the Nicobar Islands. Everybody agrees that this is the flight path of the plane. Now, when it gets to the Nicobar Islands at around 1840 UTC, which is only about 20 minutes after they've lost contact with it, this is the part where we believe our video is being taken. There's a witness whose name is Kate T, who is on a boat going from India to Thailand, who is directly underneath the flight path that everybody agrees. And she saw the plane. She saw a orange uniform glowing plane that she originally thought might be a missile, and then realized as it got closer that it was a passenger plane flying so low that she was afraid that it was going to land in the water and capsize the boat. So she watched this plane circle around her boat. for about 5 minutes or so.
Whoa.
In a way that seems consistent with what we see in the videos. She even mentioned seeing dark smoke, which could actually be the trails that we see from the orbs, although we're not certain at this point. Now, the other thing that's extremely important about this 1840 location in the Nicobar Islands, this is the location where the official narrative says that the plane turned into the South Indian Ocean. So in order for our story and our videos to be true, only thing that has to be false is that this plane never went into the South Indian Ocean, and what we're seeing in the videos is actually the end of what we know happened to this plane. So in order to corroborate that, I went ahead and looked at the ping data. And if you go look at the official ping data, which interestingly enough has probably less chain of custody than our videos do, at around 1840, there are some anomalous events. So I'm the first person, as I know, to report on this. If you go through the data from 1600, when this plane was on the ground, all the way up to 1840, there's dozens, if not hundreds of rows of data that all seem perfectly normal from an Excel data standpoint. When you get to 1840, all of a sudden the data has weird stuff happening to it. There's a bunch of zeros all the way down it. There's cells that are missing data. And then when you get to the next ping after 1840, which is 1940, and the subsequent pings after that every hour from 1940 to about 2313, there's only 10 total rows of data. So we just went from dozens of rows of data for every single minute that there was a ping to 10 total rows for 5 hours worth of data. And there's a pattern in those 10 rows. The channel just flips back and forth. It seems like the satellite designation all of a sudden switches and now has a consistent pattern as well. So either something happened here that is not being fully explained, or this ping data has been manipulated in some way. And there's actually evidence that it might have been. There was an engineer from Inmarsat that was on record saying that they thought someone was playing a hoax on Inmarsat. In addition to that, when Inmarsat released the data and their findings, the CEO went out of their way to say that the data is good, presuming that the data has not been spoofed. I don't know why anyone would issue all these disclaimers if they were confident in their data. Nobody has corroborated the Inmarsat data. So ultimately, when we look at this data here, the whole turn into the South Indian Ocean appears to be a complete fabrication.
Wow, that's incredible. So up to this point, what do we believe happened? I know some people talk about the fake passports that two passengers use to get on board the flight. Is it possible that they somehow got below deck, or that they were agents on board that were somehow influencing whatever happened? And presumably, if they were agents, you wouldn't want to like kill them. It wouldn't be a suicide mission. They would probably go on the plane expecting somehow to be recovered in some way, shape, or form. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I actually was very surprised when I found out that the fake passengers were there. That was something that was brushed under the rug so quickly that I had totally forgotten about it. And when I went back and looked at that, if you were to take away the pilot's suicide myth, then the next logical suspects would be two fake passengers that were paying tens of thousands of dollars for passports and flights to China that are flying together, that are changing their appearance to look like the stolen passports, that are also a couple of the only non-Asian people aboard the plane. Keep in mind that the vast majority of the people on board this plane were Chinese nationals, and most of the rest were Malaysian nationals, Indonesian nationals. So these people were going to stick out quite a bit. The story and narrative that has the most evidence is an espionage scenario because of potentially the fake passengers, potentially the jam at 1721, the fact that our assets are in a specific location at the exact right time to take the video. And the people that are implicated are the ones who are taking that video, the US government. So in that scenario, if what we see in these videos, the technology that we see is reverse engineered technology, then the scenario here is the motive is for control of that technology, which is to say that we want to keep that technology from China. And as it turns out, there was 20 semiconductor scientists on board this plane from Freescale Semiconductors. Just the other day, I was on a podcast talking to someone who worked for that company in 2014. And it was a very big deal that these people went missing. They were very important people in this company. And just after this, the company was actually sold off to another company.
Whoa,
shady. So if these scientists had cracked superconductivity 9 years ago, for example, and they were going off to China with that intellectual property, then that could be motive enough for the government to steal those scientists, to either have them work for them or just to keep them from China. So, because whoever controls the technology we see in these videos is going to control military supremacy of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. whoever possesses this kind of tech, well, that's endgame. And like, if you just kind of read into that with a little bit of personality, let's say that they are trying to stop China from creating this exact type of technology, and then you go and use that exact technology to kidnap those people. It's kind of sending a message to the people who might know, or people who are in the know, like, no, we're top dog and we can do what we want, and you are not going to get this tech. Because at this point, with all these things that don't quite line up, it doesn't seem so much like stuff aliens might do. It seems more like something that humans might do. It might be, in this case, government or corporate espionage, or maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, we have to be very careful not to attribute human motivations to a non-human intelligence, right? So when we see this and it's like, this is something that our people would do, we can't really say, oh, well, maybe, non-human intelligence would do that. So again, that's more evidence that this would be something that's, more on the espionage side. Though again, there's evidence for more than just that theory. I think the hardest part with the espionage scenario is, why are you doing it at that location as opposed to at 1721 when the plane goes dark over the South China Sea? Mm-hmm. Why not just do whatever you're going to do to it right there instead of this whole situation where it flies over there? So there actually is still evidence that this might be an emergency, UFO encounter or some type of hybrid scenario between these narratives. But either way, I think that the big question you ask is, why take this risk, right? Why do this? And to me, it has to be about something more than money, because why kind of take this risk of filming all of this and having it potentially be leaked for something that you can buy or for some cargo that you can produce, right? It really needs to be about something more than that.
I had an inkling too that because all of the satellites and the cameras were trained on it when it disappeared, I mean, it could also be a test run of this new technology that we've reverse engineered or something. So a Black Ops project, perhaps. Maybe it was a test run.
Yeah, and the only reason why I could see to like even do this would be to try to hide the plane. Because otherwise, why not just fly the plane? If what we see in the videos is teleportation, which I think that science shows that's the most likely scenario for what we see, then the logical conclusion is you're trying to hide that from other people. So hypothetically, maybe the location was chosen because there's no satellites looking at that location. So the other countries can't see what you're doing. Now, if so, they kind of messed up in filming it with two different cameras that got leaked. But that could be a potential reason. Interestingly enough, China might have saw something. They might know, because right afterwards, China released a satellite picture that was reported as debris. But when we went and looked, we found no debris there. If you go look at that, and you can actually Google this and find it, what it looks like in the satellite picture is 3 orbs in a triangle formation. It makes me wonder if what they were doing is trying to send a message saying, we saw what you did, or we know what you did.
God, that is crazy to think about. Now, to follow up on that, if they disappeared the plane and presuming they didn't teleport it, let's say, to the moon, which is what some people were throwing around there, which is amusing, but I don't think it's probably what happened. Where did they go? And what do we think happened to them?
Yeah, so first I want to address why we think it's teleportation, right? Because people may say, why are you jumping to that conclusion? And I'll say that we didn't jump to that conclusion. Actually, I was first under the impression and a very strong opinion that what we were seeing was an annihilation event. And I learned that is not true because I had to go back to basic science and what Einstein told us, which is that E equals mc squared, which essentially means that this energy has to go somewhere. If this whole plane were to be deatomized or destroyed without using exotic material, then what would have happened is a much more energetic event than what we see in this video. It would have potentially destroyed part of the planet. And then we also went through the idea, well, what if it's just cloaked, right? What if they're using some sort of spoofing or electromagnetic jamming to make it so that you can't see any aspect of the plane at all? No electromagnetic signals at all. Unfortunately, that's ruled out too because the exhaust trails completely stop when the plane disappears from space-time, which we would have continued to see those even if they were able to cloak every other aspect of the plane, which really just leaves us with one scenario. That energy has to go somewhere else. So it had to be teleported somewhere. Now, is that to the future or another dimension or the moon or simply to Diego Garcia military base, which is where pretty much everyone has presumed that this plane somehow got to? The issue was no one could explain how it got there. No one could explain how that meshes with the satellite pings that we have. But if the plane can teleport, that potentially opens up all new lines of inquiry that makes it possible.
Another thing that convinced me that it was teleported, not only does the quote explosion, it's actually an implosion if you look hard enough. And another thing is that if there was some kind of explosion or, burst of energy going on, you would see debris falling from where the plane was moments before, and there's nothing left behind. Not even the exhaust, like you mentioned, which it's just, I've never seen anything like it.
And just to kind of clarify what you just mentioned there in terms of implosion versus explosion, I think a better way to describe it is exothermic versus endothermic. What we see in our video is actually a cold event. That's why in the thermal, it's black and it's dark. And that's why I think that the leaker colored the video. They wanted to make sure that we would not miss the fact that that's a cold event. That no one could say, oh, well, the heat signatures are just reversed or something like that. That it would be very obvious that it would stand out to us that the zap that we see is cold. That's an endothermic event. And also the trails that we see from the orbs are pretty bizarre as well. Mm-hmm. It looks like the trails are actually in front of the orbs. And the only reason why they appear behind them is because they're moving at a very high rate of speed. So it actually appears as though these orbs are creating some type of electromagnetic force that's pulling them along, similar to the force of gravity, which is very bizarre.
Now, as we near the end of the, quote, free show, I think this one is important enough to where I want everybody to hear the full show. So I'm going to post the extended version of the show for free, where I normally would on the Patreon, except it won't be behind a paywall. So as we get to the end of this episode, please go to www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, and you can hear the whole rest of the episode. But before we get there, I wanted to bring up some, some mysterious occult woo-woo stuff that we like to discuss on this show that's easy to overlook. But we know back in the 70s that the US government created a program with Stanford Research Institute to perfect the art and, science of remote viewing. And we know that the government used remote viewers for about 30 years, basically psychic spies, people who could get into a certain mind state and begin to accurately describe objects at a distance without ever having seen them. Oftentimes, just by being handed some coordinates. People that were trained to do this could do that just by looking at the coordinates on a piece of paper, and then at best, about 65% accuracy, they could describe what was at those coordinates at that point in time. And, fast forward now to the 2020s, there's people who do classes and train others on how to use this ability in the private sector. And from what I understand, there was a group of remote viewers who were asked to look at this particular event and describe what they saw. And to me, it was really quite remarkable what was described. They said they saw like a whirlpool type energy going on, which if you look closely at the footage, you see the orbs. We mentioned how they rotate, so their hot side is facing the aircraft as it orbits. We see that the orbs sort of fly inward during the giant endothermic flash, and it certainly looks like a whirlpool. It's been known that people who are remote viewing, they tend to use words or see images of something that they've seen before, regardless of what it is they're viewing. And so to describe it as a whirlpool-like energy, to me, that's a hit. And they describe what happens on board the aircraft. They said stuff like, oh, there's bright light, there's a whole lot of sound. It looked like pretty chaotic there for a moment, and then suddenly they're like in the jungle, right? And everybody's safe, and everybody's like, whoa, dude, what just happened? Which, that's kind of what we're speculating. It's like, you're saying that's what the evidence is leading to, that there was some sort of thing that flew around this plane, did some sort of high technology teleportation, which transferred the crew somewhere safely, potentially to Diego Garcia, where I guess their phones would have been black bagged, or whatever, to not even really turned off, because, like you said, you got the family members calling, and well, that leads us to the same place the evidence leads us. And if we know anything about remote viewing, is that you can't rely on it by itself. It's really great in tandem with other more traditional means of intelligence gathering. And all the puzzle pieces seem to fit. If that's what the remote viewers saw, and if that's where the evidence leads to, man, that almost seems conclusive for me. Like, it's nice to think that the crew on board survived that. Now, where do you stand with the whole remote viewing thing? Because thus far, you have done such an excellent job of avoiding the need to lean on anything speculative or esoteric or occult, and you've totally just stuck to the facts, which I think is admirable.
Yeah, I've looked into a little bit of the esoteric aspects, including the remote viewing. I'm not personally a big supporter of remote viewing because I like to have my explanations be grounded in, the facts and the evidence. though I don't discourage anyone else from believing whatever they want to believe in. I think the big thing with respect to this case is that we don't need remote viewing evidence to really prove our case. We have enough evidence without it, though that does add on to it as well. So it certainly doesn't hurt, but we're not depending on that in any way.
And it's interesting to think that we only got into remote viewing because we were concerned about the Russians getting into it. And we had good intelligence to suggest that they were spending money on it, so we should too. And if we zoom out and look at this incident, it's kind of fun to consider that this also may have been espionage committed in order to keep certain technology away from somebody else and maintain the superiority that we already had. What gets my goat is how high-tech these damn orbs are. And this is really going off script, but if you look into conspiracy lore, especially the whackety schmackety stuff, it's like stuff we almost like laugh about on the show, but I try to keep an open mind because oftentimes with disinfo, there's a little bit of truth mixed in there, to keep people coming after it, right? And to throw off the truth. And it's exceedingly common in conspiracy lore to attribute our advances in high technology to collaboration with alien visitors of some form or fashion. So in this case, what if it's government agents sitting there at their computer console and they're like working with like Klaxor from Zeta Reticuli, and they've made a deal with these like Greys or Nazca mummy people to be like, hey, we let you abduct people and we get the high technology. We can't let these Chinese scientists be getting it. And they're like, yes, we will help out. I don't know why. I don't even know what I'm saying. That's just a fun thing to consider, that like maybe it's government and Xenos working together to abduct these Chinese folks. But, I'm a dreamer.
Yeah, there's a lot of narratives in terms of, and that's one of the hybrid narratives, right? Are there non-human intelligence working with governments for whatever nefarious purposes? At the end of the day, I think what you're getting at is what happened to these people? What happened to the plane and the passengers on board? I think the simplest explanation based on the evidence is that, they were taken to Diego Garcia military base. And I don't like to think of the worst in people in general. So I don't necessarily think that they were killed, but they may have been silenced in other ways. The government could have made backroom deals with the other governments like China, Malaysia, Indonesia to return those people at some point in the future. And that could explain why the family members have gone dark, for example. Keep in mind, there was only a handful of Western passengers on board the plane that maybe would have been able to, kind of expose this whole thing by going to the media. So if you can control the media, though, then doesn't give those people very much option. So the most likely scenario would be that they were silenced somehow. But there are explanations that are more esoteric that could say that these people were, used or abducted, by non-human intelligence for whatever testing purposes that they may do if you believe in the kind of UFO-ology aspect of it. So really anything is possible. And at this point, the only people that are going to be able to tell us that are the people who are filming the event.
Well, I think we should get into some of that bigger picture conspiratorial espionage stuff in the second half. If you'd like to hear the rest of the show, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where you'll be able to hear the rest of this episode for free. But if you want to hear our whole back catalog of extended episodes, well, it'll cost you $5. I'll send you a 5x5 vinyl high quality sticker of our cover art, and of course the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can share your insights into what you think happened here or anything else we talk about on the show. Ashton, tell us a little bit about how we can follow you and perhaps get involved. Maybe if Agent 370 is out there hiding under a rock and he wants to risk contacting you, how does he do that? Where do we get involved? Ashton, tell us a little bit about where to find you.
So first of all, the investigation is still ongoing. We're still uncovering a lot more evidence, and I've got more pages of evidence and stuff to write up that could go for a very long time. So you're not too late to get involved for sure. Probably the easiest way is to follow me on Twitter, where my Twitter is @justxashton. I've changed it to be much more simple. And last week we went ahead and started a new subreddit, which is MH370X, which is already taken off and has maybe more than 500 members already in less than a week. So you can come to either of those places and you'll be able to find all the work that we've had. You'll be able to contribute. We also have a Discord as well, where if you want to kind of see the behind the scenes of the investigation and what we're talking about, you can join that. All that we ask for any of these is that you be respectful. Okay, our intention here is to solve the mystery of this. We're not looking for people who want to come and ridicule us. So if you are coming with that intention, save your breath.
Excellent. Well, I hope that this somehow attracts some very secret, knowledgeable about aliens and UFOs person to come and leak some more tantalizing information. Until then, thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.